what are the consequences of constant economic growth? If you have an economic system like capitalism that assumes that year after year, you need to see more and more and more growth. Well, back in the 1970s, researchers over at MIT looked into this and they found that if we keep going the pace that we're going in, by 2040, society will collapse. And guess what? A Harvard researcher decided to follow up on these findings, and she found that we're actually on pace, meaning that these MIT researchers were absolutely right. So let me give you these details, just to give you a little more context or more details about the study itself that was done by MIT. In 1972, a team of MIT scientists got together to study the risks of civilizational collapse. Their system dynamics model, published by the Club of Rome, identified impending limits to growth that meant industrial civilization was on track to collapse sometime within the 21st century due to, this is important, overexploitation of planetary resources. Let's say it again, overexploitation of planetary resources. Now, we're experiencing the ramifications of climate change as we speak, but let me give you the details on the analysis that was done later by a Harvard researcher. So the current business as usual trajectory of global civilization is heading toward the terminal decline of economic growth within the coming decade, and at worst could trigger societal collapse by around 2040. So the Harvard researcher that we're talking about here, her name is Gaia Harrington, and her new analysis examines data across 10 key variables, namely population, fertility rates, mortality rates, industrial output, food production, services, non-renewable resources, persistent pollution, human welfare, and ecological footprint. She found that the latest data most closely aligns with two particular scenarios: business as usual and comprehensive technology. So business as usual is what we keep hearing about in regard to COVID ending and everything going back to normal. But what are the consequences of that? Can we actually just go back to normal? Based on these findings, no, there are some severe consequences to that. So business as usual and comprehensive technology scenarios show a halt in growth within a decade or so from now. Both scenarios thus indicate that continuing business as usual, that is pursuing continuous growth, is not possible. Even when paired with unprecedented technological development and adoption, business as usual, as modeled by limits to growth, would inevitably lead to declines in industrial capital, agricultural output, and welfare levels within this century. So I've got more details about this, but Cenk, I wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so I'll say two things before handing it off to Adrienne. So look, she's saying there that they were right in 1972, but there's a separate story in the news today about the Amazon, and they're saying, no, we were wrong. It's happening quicker than we realized. And so some of the things that we thought were gonna happen way later have already happened. So for example, in some of the affected regions in the Amazon, temperature has gone up in the last 40 years by 4.5 degrees. We are absolutely screwed. 4.5 degrees in a weather pattern is no big deal. Okay, it's 74 degrees, it's 78.5 degrees. That's not important, right? But when the entire region is lifted by 4.5 degrees on average, then that is epic disaster. And so we're deforesting the Amazon, that puts less water in the air. I can go on and on, but we've created a vicious cycle we cannot get past. In fact, some of the scientists in that story say, we're not at the tipping point, we're past the tipping point.
Yeah. Exactly.
So when they look back at us in the future, they're gonna say, why didn't you do something? And in fact, they'll look at videos like this and say, you see, they knew. They'll look at the story about the Amazon, they'll say they knew. They'll look at that story and go, my God, they knew in 1972. And then it was reaffirmed in 2021 that the scientists were exactly right? And yet they still did nothing.
Yeah.
It's always wild to me how the scientists, researchers, they always have the answer. They always know how to fix things, yet mainstream doesn't listen to them because it's not beneficial economically. And in this situation, it's exactly what we're seeing play out, where they let us know in advance that, hey, it's not gonna go well for us. We're heading toward Mad Max Thunderdome Part 2, but the reality is that people won't listen, no, because we have to generate money. And I love also that this MIT report came out pre-Amazon, in terms of Jeff Bezos, because the fact is that even when I see how that business model operates and all the boxes I have stacked up in my home and thinking of that in everyone else's home and just thinking of how much we waste and use, it's clear we're not going to make it for very long. And if not, we need to be ready to fight in the Thunderdome.
Right, I mean, the idea of infinite growth is, we really think about it, insane, right? It's insane, especially when that growth relies on exploiting the planet and its natural resources. Those resources are finite. And so when you think about the impact on agriculture, for instance, which is one of the variables that was looked at in this follow-up study, it all makes sense. I mean, it uses all this fancy lingo, but in reality, this is a very simple concept, and we're seeing the ramifications of this system that, we're seeing it in extreme weather conditions. We're seeing it in infrastructure not being able to withstand the conditions that we're dealing with. So I also want to talk a little bit about the timeline, right? Because it's not like we get to 2040 and the world ends. No, that's not what the researchers are saying here. So Harrington found in the MIT World 3 models, collapse does not mean that humanity will cease to exist, but rather that economic and industrial growth will stop and then decline, which will hurt food production and standards of living. In terms of timing, the business as usual scenario shows a steep decline to set in around 2040. But to be honest with you, I feel like we're already experiencing that steep decline. But it's not the end of the world, right? So this doesn't mean, oh my God, the situation is so dire that at this point we can do absolutely nothing about it. She mentions how technological advancements could actually help us in mitigating some of the consequences we're experiencing, but also in creating a more sustainable model, right? But I mean, we can't. That would require worldwide global cooperation, something that's kind of difficult to do when the United States is still, wanting to dominate and uses all sorts of hawkish rhetoric when it comes to China, when it comes to Russia, when it comes to other major countries that, whether you love them or not, you need to cooperate with them in order to combat climate change and the decline that we're talking about here.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think, again, when people look back, they're gonna say, wait, to Adrienne's point, why didn't they listen to the scientists? That's weird. 99% of the scientists told them that climate change was definitely happening. What did you need, 100%? Did they think that the scientists in India and Brazil and US and Philippines were all lying about temperature recordings? It's insane, right? But then they're gonna see, oh, they didn't even listen to the scientists when there was a pandemic. And the scientists said, wear the mask, get the vaccine. And people are like, no, I prefer to die. They're really going to be confounded by how stupid we are in present day America and in a lot of other parts of the world, to be honest, when it comes to climate change. Some countries are doing amazing work trying to fix the problem, and a lot of countries are not. And then to another point by Adrienne, the greed is unstoppable. That's why I talk about how the stock market is basically a greed machine. It demands 15% growth from each company every year. Well, you can't do that, right? Adrienne's right, Anna's right. You can't have infinite growth. That doesn't make any sense. You obviously set yourself up for some sort of collapse at some point, right? And then, look, the only hope that I have, and it's a weird kind of hope, other than progressives taking over in America and actually doing things that are sane, is we have declining birth rates, both in America and all across the world. So nature is going to find a way to begin to fix it, and one of the ways is, all right, you guys are not going to have kids anymore. And so part of that is because of the pollution that we're putting out there, plastic pollution and other factors. So we're kind of poisoning ourselves along with the planet. And so then you might get to equilibrium because we hurt our ability to reproduce so much that, well, we consume less resources because there's less of us. But that's not an ideal solution. So we should get to that point naturally, not through pollution and climate change. And then my last point is Adrienne's cat obviously won this video, but.
I didn't capture
him. You can see him. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I saw him earlier. He was enjoying the story. He was like, "Oh wait, what's going on with climate change?"
All right.
Good old Maverick.
And he was in fact a maverick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.